As landscape photographers, we choose our own destiny. But why? Because we choose our own lenses. So, what's the best lens for landscape photography? Let's find out. Well, I'm at the beach in the great state of Florida. No, I'm just kidding. I'm actually at Broken Bow in Oklahoma. I bet you didn't know they had lakes this big in Oklahoma. But anyway, I came down to capture some fall color, and I think it's still a little bit early for fall color, although there is some. But nevertheless, I was all over the place this morning looking for a composition. And I was really back and forth and trying to figure out, okay, well, is there a composition? Then when I found one, you know, I had to reach for my long lens, and I don't use my long lens a lot for landscape photography, my 70-200. But it really got me thinking this morning, you know, what is the best lens for landscape photography? And indeed, that is a good question. But that's a hard question to answer. The real question is, what's the best lens for you and your type of landscape photography? And I talked about this before on what's the best camera for landscape photography. And I'll leave a link to that in the end of the video, in the video description. But I often ask myself, you know, am I going to need this lens or that lens? And I had scoped out this area yesterday, so I had come down last night and looked at the landscape and tried to line up a composition, so I had an idea of the area that I wanted to be at, and it really didn't involve the 70-200. So I wasn't thinking about the long lens, and I almost left it back in the cabin. But I think we can narrow it down. I think we can find the right lens, or at least the lens that we use the most. And in fact, I had talked about focal length before, and I'll leave a link to that. What's the best focal length for landscape photography? I'll leave a link to that at the in the video description. But anyway, that was interesting, and I talked about using Lightroom to basically use your metadata in Lightroom to see which lens that you use the most. And I think that still holds true for deciding what the best lens is for landscape photography. So you can use that Lightroom metadata to go in and kind of see, well, what lens am I using more often than not? That doesn't mean that that's the only lens you're ever going to need. Sometimes the scene, and this is the best way I ever heard it said. I said this the other day. Glenn Samuel said this on Sniper Photography on his channel. But he said, you don't select the lens and then just try to find a place for a suitable composition for the lens. The composition determines what lens that you need. And that is the absolute fact. And the crux of this whole thing is that it's the landscape, it's the composition that determines what's the best lens for landscape photography. So it's really not us. And although, as I said in the opening, you know, we choose our own destiny in landscape photography because we choose our lenses. And that's still true. We do choose our lenses. But the thing is what lens are you going to choose and what's the best for you? Okay, to narrow it down, I think we have to think about what genre of landscape photography or subcategory of landscape photography are we really most interested in? You know, I think your environment has a lot to do with that. So what do you have available? You might be interested more in nature photography and wildlife, and therefore that type of photography is going to dictate the lens that you use. The point is that if you're interested in nature photography, you might have to invest in a $10,000 Nikon 600mm lens. But for me, it's usually an open vista, and I'm often trying to capture a grand scene with many elements in the composition. So that dictates for me that more often than not, I'm typically using a 24-70 because that focal range is best suited for my type of landscape photography. So with a wide angle lens, I can really accentuate the foreground and often make the foreground my main subject, or at least you can bring an otherwise kind of mundane foreground into the composition and really just make it pop. Of course, there's a trade-off. It makes the background smaller, but it depends. And like I mentioned, a grand vista, and those are my kinds of photography. So just something to think about. But that wide angle lens, now, that's really something to consider. And if you can only afford one lens, if one lens is the way you want to go right now, you have to ask yourself, are you more interested in getting in close and really accentuating the subject? And if so, maybe a wide angle is the way to go for you. 50 millimeters on a full frame lens, or on a full frame camera, is basically like the eye sees. So that's 50 millimeters. It's a good starting point. So when you find interesting subjects, do you find yourself looking closer or wanting to get further back? And that might help you determine which lens is the best lens for landscape photography, at least for you. So as I mentioned earlier, maybe you want to focus in on a specific smaller, more minimalistic part of a composition and maybe blur out the background. And this 70-200 will certainly do that for you, because this lens has a lot of compression. So what I mean by compression is it brings the background and the foreground closer together. It kind of crunches the scene. So that might be more of the lens for you if that's the kind of photography you're more interested in. Maybe you want to get out into a field and you see a big field of flowers, and instead of focusing on the vista itself, you want to be more minimalistic and get in there and capture a cluster of flowers, or maybe one specific flower, and blur out everything else. This is a very good lens to do that. So looking to others to determine the best lens for you, there's nothing wrong with that, but maybe you should look to these other photographers and ask yourself the question, well, what kind of photography are they doing, and is that something that I would be interested in? And so if you like their style of photography, maybe it's open vistas, maybe it's close in, maybe it's birds, but then you can kind of look at the tools of the trade that they use and help use that information, take that information to help you decide what the best lens for your type of landscape photography is. Well, I hope some of this was beneficial to you and maybe help you decide what lens to choose, or maybe what lenses to choose. But ultimately that choice is yours and you'll have to decide. But I would say base that on your type of landscape photography. And I think you'll make the best choice. And in fact, if you're only picking, or you can only afford one lens, or you're only gonna purchase one lens right now, think about what's more interesting to you, what style of photography is more interesting to you, and then kind of try to decide what's the focal length that I would need, what's the lens characteristics, do I need image stabilization on the lens? All those questions are valid questions to ask, but you'll only know to ask them if you have an idea of what type of photography you're really interested in. But anyway, hey, I mentioned a couple of other videos. I talked about what's the best camera for landscape photography. Don't forget to check out that one. I think if you like this video, you'll certainly like that one. We got one on lens hoods and why I use a lens hood all the time, and that's something else to take a look at. And I'll leave links to those, and my video on focal length also, that's another one. I'll leave links to those in the end in the video description. Well, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. And if you do subscribe, hit that little bell icon so you're notified of any future videos that I post. And drop me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. And as always, if I don't see you down the road, maybe I'll see you on the trail. Oh, bonus tip on this 14 to 24. This is the Nikon 14 to 24, very bulbous. And what I have on here is the Lee filter attachment. When you put that on there, it's not fun to take it on and off every time you want to use a filter. So I leave it on there permanently. And a big complaint that I've seen a lot of people have is the lens cap doesn't stay on. It's just easy to come off. So Lee gives you this to cover it up. But everybody worries about damaging their lens. The truth is that it's meant to go on over the cap. So if you put it on right, you'll get it, you can stretch it over the entire thing. So it just sits neatly on your lens, and you don't have to worry. You got your cap on there too. It's a bonus tip. Just for you.